So to develop the eyesight of the eagle and the heart of the hummingbird, the warrior consciously connects and communes with Mama Earth, with nature. This is what is asked of the activist. The ability to cultivate wisdom in a time of conflict, to rise above the base reactionary state of consciousness and meet your adversary with humanity. Many a battle has been avoided by sharing the peace pipe. So we are called to do everything we can to remedy the situation with compassion, dignity, and fairness. So can you imagine what happens when 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people who have stopped debating each other, who have stopped mistrusting each other, decide to honor each other and collaborate? Yeah? We are talking about a true nebula, a star nursery, a birthplace of an entire culture. From this place of love and mutual trust, we create the songs, the stories, and the relationships that elevate the spirit, that nourish the heart, and call the original human being back to life. My friends, this is my prayer. May our hearts be inspired by the innumerable lives given to guard our humanity. We have descended into a zoo human being. It is a long road how we have ended up here. Where it all began, I cannot say, but I can name some of the elements that have taken us here. It begins with the family. What was done to our families? We were broken apart. Kinship and trust was destroyed amongst us. Through unnatural and violent means, humans began to dominate each other and dominate the creation. Clusters of self-sovereign villages were turned into larger and larger cities under the guise of development and efficiency. Suddenly, nothing was enough. No longer was it possible to live off the land, for land was taken away from people. Fathers were taken away from home into battlefields and plantations. Rivers of blood polluted our beloved earth, and our eyes became stained with images of war. Sickness and poverty ensued, and generational trauma took hold of the bloodlines. Factories and industries were born, and the Tower of Babel was erected. Later, mothers also were driven away from home and lost their children into the hands of strangers, as the wages of one parent no longer covered the cost of living. Wherein once lived a sacred space, a family union, now sits a foreign invader, a creature without flesh or blood, a faceless institution which everyone is bound to from birth. Government. Separated from our lands, from our communities, from our families, we are an animal in captivity. An artificial habitat has been constructed around us, and we have lost our vital connection to the earth. So much so that many of us don't even know that we live in a cage, that there is another way. Us modern zoo humans have lost most senses and skills required to actually live in our natural habitat. From how to build a dwelling to how to cut a tree or make a fire, how to sense danger or read the weather, how to weave fabric or sew clothes, how to forage plants and mushrooms, how to make our own medicine, how to raise our children or build a community. The truth is, we don't know how to live. We have lost the art of living. There's a spiritual sickness that has inflicted humanity, a dark force. Some call it Wendigo.
We've seen that face before. the drape of frost-stiffened hair, the white-rimmed eyes peering out from behind the tanned hide of a human-like mask, the flitting gaze that settles only when it finds something of true interest in a mirror. Cruel eyes, a false face, and a demeanor of ravening hunger, despite the unconscionable hoarding of excess while others go without. The spittle quickly licked away from the sly fox in the henhouse smirk that sends chills down your spine, a mouth that howls lies, pretending it's an anthem. Americans keep acting surprised by the daily assault on American values once thought unassailable. I don't speak for all Native people, but we've smelled that carrion breath before. We know who this is. The one whose hunger is never slaked. The more he consumes, the hungrier he grows. We've met him on our shores, at the Thanksgiving table, at the treaty table, at the greasy grass, on the riverbank of Standing Rock, and in the courts. His mask doesn't fool us. And having so little left to lose, and all that is precious to protect, I call him the name of the monster that my ancestors spoke of around the winter campfire, the embodied nightmare of greed, the Wendigo. We know him. Perhaps this is why he has taken special efforts to poke Indigenous peoples in the eye, because we see him. He has proven himself an equal opportunity offender to people Black and brown. But with the spite of bullies everywhere, he has sharpened his stick with special vindictiveness for Native people. It shrieks with unmet want, consumed with consumption. It lays waste to humankind and to our more than human kin. Wendigo tales arose in a commons-based society where sharing was a survival value, and greed made you a danger to the whole. But in a profit-based society, the indulgent self-interest that our people once held as monstrous is now celebrated as success. Americans are called on to admire what our people viewed as unforgivable. Not only was the land taken and her people replaced, but colonization is also the intentional erasure of the original worldview, substituting the definitions and meanings of the colonizer. That time-lapse map of land taking would also show the replacement of the Indigenous idea of land as a commonly held gift with the notion of private property. While the battle between land as sacred home and land as capital stained the ground red. Of course, our ideas were dangerous to the idea of manifest destiny, resisting the lie that the highest use of our public land is extraction. They stood in the way of converting a living, inspirited land into parcels of natural resources. Native people have a different term for public lands. We call them home. We call them our sustainer, our library, our pharmacy, our sacred places. Indigenous identity and language are inseparable from land. Land is the residence of our more than human relatives. It is the place of the dust of our ancestors, the holder of seeds, the makers of rain, our teacher. Land is not capital to which we have property rights. Rather, it is the place for which we have moral responsibility in reciprocity for its gift of life. And here is the question that together we have to at last confront. Is land a source of belongings, or is it the source of our most profound sense of belonging? We can choose. Our ancestors had a remedy for the Wendigo sickness and the contagion that it spreads. Those who endangered life with their greed were banished from the circle of everything that they would destroy. They were cast out from the firelight and the bubbling stew pot, from care and from community. It's not enough to banish the Wendigo himself. He must also heal the contagion he has spread. You, right now, can choose to set aside the mindset of the colonizer and choose instead to become native to place. You can choose to belong. Colonists, you've been here long enough to watch the prairies disappear, to witness the genocide of redwoods, to see water poisoned by the sickness of Wendigo thinking. The Wendigo has no moral compass. His needle swings wildly between the magnetism of whatever prophet beckons. Surely, however, the land has taught you differently, too. That in a time of great polarity and division, the common ground we crave is in fact right beneath our feet. The very land on which we stand is our foundation and can be a source of shared identity and a source of common cause. What could be more common and shared than the land that gives us all life? Rivers don't ask for party affiliation before giving you a drink, and berries don't withhold their gifts from anyone. We must acknowledge that by dint of history and time and biogeochemistry that unites us all, your dust and your grandchildren's dust will mingle here. They will know what you do here. They will reap the consequences of whether you choose to banish Wendigo thinking. You could follow the going home star and make a home here, grounded in justice for land and people. Because colonists become ancestors too. The question is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be?
For the indigenous souls of all people who can still remember how to be real cultures, life is a race to be elegantly run, not a race to be competitively won. It cannot be won. It is the gift of the world's diverse motion that must be maintained, because human life has been given the gift of elegant motion. Whether we limp, roll, crawl, stroll, or fly, it is an obligation to engender that elegance of motion in our daily lives, in service of maintaining life, by moving and living as beautifully as we can. All else, to me, has the familiar taste of that domineering, warlike harshness that daily tries to cover its tracks in order to camouflage the deep ruts of some old, sick, grinding, ungainly need to flee away from the elegance of our original indigenous human souls. Our attempt to avariciously conquer or win a place where there are no problems, whether it be heaven or a new democracy, never mind if it is a spiritually ugly and immorally won and taken from someone else who is already there, has made a citifying world of people who, unconscious of it, have become our own ogreish problem to ourselves, our future, and the world. This is a problem that we cannot continue to attempt to competitively outrun by more and more effectively designed technological approaches to speed away from the past, for the specter of our own earth-wasting reality runs grinning competitively right alongside of us. By developing even more effective and entertaining methods of escape that only burn up the earth, the air, the animals, the plants, and the deeper substance of what it should mean to be human, by competing to get ahead, we have created a breakless competition that has outrun our innate beauty and marked out a very definite and imminent finish line. Living in and on a sphere, we cannot really outrun ourselves anyway. Therefore, I say, the entire devastating and hideous state of the world, and its constant wounding and wrecking of the wild, beautiful, natural, viable, and small, only to keep alive an untenable cultural proceedance, is truly a spiritual sickness, one that will not be cured by the efficient use of the same thinking that maintains the sickness. Nor can this overly expensive, highly funded illness be symptomatically kept at bay any longer by more political, environmental, or social programs. We must, as individuals and communities, take the time necessary to learn how we might indigenously remember what a sane, original existence for a viable people might look like. To begin remembering our indigenous belonging on the earth, back to life, we must metabolize as individuals the grief of recognition of our lost directions, digest it into a valuable spiritual compost that allows us to learn to stay put without outrunning our strange past, and to get small, unarmed, brave, and beautiful. by trying to feed the holy in the nature with the fruit of the beauty from the tree of memory of our indigenous souls, grown in the composted failures of our past need to conquer, watered by the tears of our cultural grief, we might become ancestors worth descending from, and possibly grow a place of hope for a time beyond our own.
The best teacher to wake you up is Mother Earth. The best teacher is the water, the trees, the wind. To look outside and say, this is real. This is real. Without this, you can't live. That's when your true religion starts, because we're intertwined together. You know, we need them as much as, you know, they need us. But with respect. We work together. We help each other. So I just say that to the people out there. You already have it. You don't have to look for it. But go there and greet yourself. Go there. Go there. And then as you're in those deep sleeps, it will begin to talk to you. Because the wind speaks through the trees when the trees make the noise. And then in a deep sleep, then it's translated. Then it gives you visions. There's times that the wind will hit the tree and it'll sound like somebody talking to you. That's what we lost, because we were colonized and we're all forced to live in this capitalist world. So if I could leave that for anybody, you know, around the world, is don't forget that, because it was everywhere. Not just here among Native people. It was everywhere. And the only reason why we know it is because they're trying to make us like them. When we turn off the volume and we hear nothing from Mother Earth. And we look at it as a commodity. We look at it as a resource. We sell it. That's what they want to teach us. Scary.
See, I keep meeting these people. I mean, just a few days ago, I met this man whom I greatly admire. He's a Swedish physicist, Gustav Bjornstrand, and he told me that he no longer watches television, he doesn't read newspapers, and he doesn't read magazines. He's completely cut them out of his life because he really does feel that we're living in some kind of Orwellian nightmare now, and that everything that you hear now contributes to turning you into a robot. And when I was at Findhorn, I met this extraordinary English tree expert who had devoted his life to saving trees. Just got back from Washington, lobbying to save the redwoods. He's 84 years old. He always travels with a backpack because he never knows where he's going to be tomorrow. And when I met him at Findhorn, he said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "New York." He said, "Ah, New York, yes, that's a very interesting place. Do you know a lot of New Yorkers who keep talking about the fact that they want to leave but never do?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why do you think they don't leave?" I gave him different banal theories. He said, "Oh, I don't think it's that way at all." He said, "I think that New York is the new model for the new concentration camp, where the camp has been built by the inmates themselves, and the inmates are the guards, and they have this pride in this thing they've built. They've built their own prison, and so they exist in a state of schizophrenia, where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made, or to even see it as a prison." And then he went into his pocket and he took out a seed for a tree and he said, "This is a pine tree." He put it in my hand and he said, "Escape before it's too late." And that this is the beginning of the rest of the future now, and that from now on there'll simply be all these robots walking around, feeling nothing, thinking nothing. And there'll be nobody left almost to remind them that there once was a species called a human being, with feelings and thoughts, and that history and memory are right now being erased, and soon nobody will really remember that life existed on the planet.
I'm under no illusion of the magnitude and scope of this sickness. It has completely infiltrated our species and every aspect of our societies. But I am not here to tell you that story. In my heart, I know that you all know that story. I'm here to share with you a story of returning home, a prayer to evoke the original human being back to life. So this is not a journey of evolution. This is a journey of remembrance. We are here to revive something which is already within us, which has already lived and thrived on this earth. One of the beautiful qualities of the original human being is that we are relational beings. In contrast to the modern way, the original human being did not grow separate from his family to pursue his individual goals. He came to flourish thanks to the people around him, guiding him, teaching him, loving him. And he grew in continuum with the wisdom and grace of his ancestors. We are tremendously malleable, so the human influence from our birth community and culture dictates largely what kind of characteristics are brought forth from the potential of our soul. Whichever kind of ingredients we have as a foundation will develop our soul a certain way. This is not random. This is the law of cause and effect. This is why the social engineers of our time have very carefully stripped away certain elements, because they know what it will result into. When you leach out certain minerals from the soil, the plants will not grow to be as strong. The same is true for us human beings. When you deprive a human soul of the ingredients that nourish it, it will grow spiritually weak and malnourished. Spiritual elements that culture a soul are things like folklore that teach you the living lore of the creation, poetry, art, and music, which inspire the soul, clothing that honors and celebrates the gift of life, architecture, which tunes our frequencies, relationships that nourish the heart. These elements inform the growing soul and mold it accordingly. The more these things are either completely removed or replaced with stories of selfishness that drive us further away from harmony with the creation, poetry and art that distorts the soul, music that is generated by AI, clothing devoid of color and joy, relationships which break the heart, the further apart we develop from the original human being. The more technology we consume, the more machine-minded we become. The more we consume bite-sized, short-form information, the shorter our attention span gets. And the more we multitask, the more fragmented our consciousness becomes. You see where I'm going with this? There are many ways to bring into reality the transhumanist agenda. There are many ways to become a cyborg, not just by inserting microchips under our skin. It is the culturing of the soul that is the most crucial mission to us, since the life of a soul is spanning over multiple incarnations. However we spiritually grow or devolve in this lifetime will also govern the destination of our next incarnation. By the influence and power of culture, entire generations of souls can spiritually devolve or rise up. This is why there is such a systemic attempt to destroy all indigenous culture and replace it with a sterile one-world government. It is an attempt to completely desoul and degenerate humanity. In addition, energetic and physical influences like our bloodline, frequency of our environment, quality of our terrain, purity of our water, air, food, soil, and climate inform and build the energetic, emotional, physical body. These influences dictate what kind of a temple we are building to house our soul. There are two different ways we are being malnourished, impoverished, degraded, demoralized, and dehumanized today. Through the culture, which molds the soul, and through the physical and energetic influences which build the body. Since our modern culture has been stripped from nearly all elements which actually facilitate the growth of a soul from infancy to spiritual maturity, there is hardly any true culture left in the West.
We call the seven fires prophecies. These prophecies have also become reality. So it's an interesting space where prophecy and history converging right here, right now. And it's said that in the time of the first fire, our people all lived together on the eastern shore with our Wabanaki relatives. But big changes were coming to Turtle Island when those sails were coming toward us. And so the people decided that in order to keep the sacred fire alive, the people had to separate. And so our Wabanaki relatives stayed on the Atlantic coast as the guardians of the eastern door. And the others, the people who became our Anishinaabe people, agreed to move to the west, to safeguard the sacred fire, and that they would move to the west until they came to the Great Lakes, the place where the food grows on the water, our manumin, our wild rice. And in the history describes what happened in each of those fires, which refers to a historical era where our people lived. It refers to the time when people would be removed from their land. It refers to the time when different spirituality would be imposed upon our people and nearly break the spiritual traditions of our people. We know that came to pass. It talks about the time when traditional knowledge would become fragmented and scattered all over the land. It talks about when the ceremonies would be lost, when the language would be lost, when our children would be taken from us. All of this we know has happened. And it also says that there will come a time when you can no longer dip your cup into the stream and drink. There will come a time when the air is too thick and choking to breathe. And there will even come a time when the plants and animals will begin to turn their faces away from us. And we know that this has come to pass as we hang on the precipice of climate chaos and the age of the sixth extinction. We know we've come to that place. But the prophecies also say there will come a time after all this has happened, all this loss, all these wounds to Mother Earth and to the people, that all the world's people together, all four colors of man, will come together and there will be a fork in the road. And in my imagination, one of those paths is beautiful and dewy and green and grassy, and you want to walk barefoot there. And the other path is burnt to a crisp. It's nothing but cinders. It would cut your feet. And we stand there at a time of choice in the history of humanity, in the history of Mother Earth as well. And we know what path we want to choose. We all want to barefoot. But what the prophecy tells us is that that is not our work. Here in the time of the seventh fire people might look longingly at that green path. We can't walk it yet. We have instead to turn back along the ancestors' path and pick up that which was left for us. Pick up the fragments of language. Pick up the ceremonies. Pick up the healing stories. Pick up the worldview that says that we are givers to the world. Pick up the worldview that says the world is sacred. When we pick those things up and put them in our bundles, only then can we go and walk that green path. We have to remember. We have to remember who we are. Remember how to be in loving relationship with the earth that loves us. And then when we know that, then we can walk down that green path, all of us together. And it's said that at the end of that green path, that spiritual path that sets aside materiality and the thinking that we live only in a world made of stuff, not a world made of beings, sacred beings. But then when we walk that green path, at the end, we can light the eighth fire, the eighth and final fire.
So what I wanted to bring to the table today is this word, civilization. I wanted to help us to interrogate this word a little bit. What does it mean? Where did it come from? And how has it accidentally tricked us off a cliff? Civilization comes from the Latin word civis, which means a citizen, a townsman. And so to be civilized was to be inducted into the town system, which in Roman law involved being governed by certain statutes and constitutions. So to be civilized also kind of means to be governed. And that's very important to note, because we have to understand how the word civilization was often weaponized to induct people who were not governed into the system of control and taxation. Very important. So I'm going to go through a few examples of that, how there's this spectrum between civilized and savage, and how this binary was used to disenfranchise people all over the world. So let's start first in Ireland. Long ago, maybe not too long ago, in geological time scale, in the 1100s, they were talking about how, and it's written down in historical records, how the Irish scorn the civilized life, the conveniences of the civil world, and they're always out in the forest being savages and painting them as dirty, painting them as unkept. And a lot of the Scottish kings were said to have been made civilized by being brought up by the English. And they say that the rust of their barbarism was washed away as they spent more time with England. And so there was an extreme campaign within the British Isles to really label the Welsh, the Irish, the Scottish as uncivilized and designate the British Empire as the apex of civilization. Now think about the word savage coming from the root word silva, which means forest. So people of the forest were deemed less technological, less advanced, which of course, as we can start to feel now in the 21st century, people of the forest are often much more healthy. They're not so caught up in a rat race. In America, we have so much time away from the forest, and yet a mental health epidemic. We have a regular health epidemic with diabetes and cholesterol and all of these bodily diseases that are born of us being so civilized, so detached from our mother. Also, another example is in Thailand, where the Thai kingdom, who is a Buddhist empire, they would call all of the neighboring hill tribes these uncivilized people. Then they were living in the forest. And they were often forced to become Buddhist. I have a dear friend that I met of the Gazingon nation. He's from one of these hill tribes in Thailand. And he's my age. He's in his late 30s. And he said, when I was a boy, they would force us to speak Thai, and they would force us to be Buddhist. And if we couldn't ask for the bathroom in Thai, we wouldn't be allowed to use the bathroom. And they would pee and poo in their pants, all these little kids. And so it's not too long ago in Thailand, and it's still ongoing, that the people of the Pa, the forest, were viewed and are viewed as less civilized. So we've created this spectrum of people who are close to the earth as barbaric, people who are close to the earth as savage, people who are close to the earth as low-tech cavemen, and people who are far from the earth and deep in the city as being the most civilized. And of course, again, going back to taxation, this is very intentional, because the more you can integrate more human beings into the polity, the more human energy you have to tax. So it's very important from an empire standpoint to bring more and more people into this civilization as you can. Even if we all get fairer wages, it's still us giving our bodies to a system that reaps taxes from each and every one of us. Taxes are very important for central government. And so when we talk about civilization, we have to understand that not only has this been weaponized against the people of Africa who were deemed uncivilized because simply they lived close with the land. And there's so many examples. The people of Australia deemed uncivilized because they didn't have locomotives, they didn't have smartwatches, they didn't have all these gadgets. And defining those as those who were civilized as having all of these physical tools, technologies, but what are they worth, you know? We have so many PhDs and yet so much wealth disparity. We have so many rocket scientists and yet we can't figure out how to stop war on the planet. We have so many telescopes and microscopes and yet we can't seem to see the people suffering out our front door. And so how useful is this technology if it does not allow us to be truly civilized, to have a heart, to have compassion, to have selflessness, generosity, honesty, bravery, humility. In indigenous cultures, these were the indicators of civilization. And it's true, many of us were not civilized. The ones who lost their way, who started to dominate others. Chaco Canyon, where my people come from, we had caste systems there, we had slavery there. And they say that at one point, the Creator sent us a drought, which actually destroyed our whole civilization. And we went out into the forest, into the desert. And some might say we became less civilized, but we say we became more civilized. Because now when you hang out with Dene people, AKA Navajo people, you'll never hear one clan say it's more important than another. We have banished the caste system long ago in the year about 1100 when Chaco fell apart. And so we view this different spectrum. And I think that's what I'm asking us all to consider today. How do we define civilization? And how is that not only destroyed and given people license to destroy entire indigenous civilizations because they weren't civilized by our standards, but it has also duped us out of our connection to the earth, out of our connection to the water, out of our connection to humility. And we have so many gadgets and technologies, but our hearts and our minds are in disrepair. And so how has this term civilization not only destroyed my mother's people, about 98% of Native people, as you may know, were wiped out because we were uncivilized. It was okay. We didn't have a culture, which is a lot of what my dissertation tries to disprove. You know, we were extremely potent upon the land and sculpted the land in amazing ways. But not only has this term civilization been weaponized to destroy entire peoples, you know, not just here where we're standing, but in Australia, in Africa, in Asia, and in Ireland. You know, it wasn't too long ago that Queen Elizabeth ordered that every single Celtic harpist be hung because they carried the songs, they carried the culture, they carried the identity of the Irish people. So it's not just melanated people who suffered. this definition of civilization, it's even the indigenous tribes of Europe were destroyed as well. And the Romans were absolutely against the pagans. And they said, as different is the pagan from the civilized man as the speaking from the mute, the animal to human, and those who practice senseless cults and superstitions to those who live a Christian life. So we have all of these ways of defining civilization that have not only disenfranchised entire swaths of humanity, who are arguably much more civilized than we are, but has duped us as this sort of first world culture out of our connection to the earth. Because for so long, connection to the earth was conflated with savagery. And those who were distant from the earth, locked up in their castles and their cities, were deemed more civilized. And so in what ways has this tricked us out of our own connection to ourselves, our own connection to each other, and our own connection to the earth? And so it's very important to think about, even us in this room who are so enlightened, how we may have subconsciously been indoctrinated into this notion that we are so cool when we step into our Tesla, you know? We are so cool when we pop in our AirPods. We're so advanced. We're so smart. We're so important. We're so much more ahead. Ahead, I think that's the key word I'm looking for. Ahead. But where is ahead? Why isn't the people who have been protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity, why aren't they considered ahead? Because they don't have a Tesla? And so it's very important, I think, as we are on this journey to humanize the tech world, to wisdomize the tech world, to consider the ways in which not just the word civilization, but the word technology has estranged us from some of the most civilized behavior we could ever have, which is to know the names of plants more than we know the names of corporations, which is to know the names, the sounds of birds, more than we know the sounds of cars honking, to see the rising sun as our green light to get up instead of the street lights red and green, to have a connection to reality, which we also call nature. So to end, as you chew on that, I just want to sing a little song, because I think song tends to teach us in a different way than intellectual conversations. So before I finish and start singing, I just want to say thank you all. And please interrogate, you know, what are we doing when we buy into this definition of civilization? When really the most important thing that makes someone civil is their heart, how they treat the earth, how they treat each other. And so long as they have that, they could not even have a car and be doing some of the most important work on the planet. They say that history is written by the victors, but how can there be a victor if the war isn't over? The battle has only just begun, and Creator's sending her very best warriors, seeing them in front of me right now. And we know that the physical weapons will no longer serve us. The only weapons we have and the only weapons we need to win are the weapons of truth and faith and compassion. So I'm honored to be a warrior with you in this fight to bring love to our world. I love you all very much, and have a beautiful day.
Social engineers, the high priests of the secret orders that attempt to rule this world, who have been working to break down indigenous culture and family values for millennia. Of course, the most hunted down people on this earth have been and still are the indigenous. Indu is Old Latin for in, within, and genus means generate, birth, create. So someone who is indigenous is born from within. They create meaning and generate knowledge from within, from their direct connection to the source. They experience life inside out. Whereas in our modern societies, meaning is generated externally. Knowledge is acquired outside in. And thus we are orphaned on the land we're born on. We are no longer indigenous in the true sense of the word, as our original cultures have been hijacked. We have become exogenous. But all is not lost. I see that we can still heal this collective trauma, the destruction of our indigenous roots and the theft of our identities. We just need some good medicine. Now, many of us have woken up to the inherently flawed paradigm of modern medicine, Western medicine. Their way is to numb, poison, cut, radiate, or burn the human body. They separate the body from the soul and are unable to recognize the emotional and spiritual causes behind physical symptoms. I reject even calling it medicine because it is not medicine. It's far from it. I'm paraphrasing my friend Dr. Stephen Young, as he once said a brilliant thing. Medicine is supposed to mediate the sin. Medicine. Or to bring the sine wave back from the extremities into the middle. So to practice medicine is to bring all systems into harmony. What medicine is not is using violent means to silence the symptoms or cover up the sin. True medicine is about seeing how all of the symptoms are connected, and in fact, the perfect response to the circumstances present. Cause and effect. Collectively, societally, culturally, we cannot heal if we treat each malady as a separate issue and attempt to manage them one by one, like they do in Western medicine. We have to recognize how these issues are connected. We have to be able to see the source of the dysfunction and start there. We must reconcile the sin and once again walk the golden middle way. So what is this sin? The Shipibo indigenous people speak of shitana, which is developed when one is going against nature, when one is going against their own true nature. We can use this concept as the parameter according to which we measure our alignment. How far are we from the natural way? How far are we from home? 2 years ago, I co-founded a community project in my motherland with the mission of collective soul retrieval. We are a private membership association called Kotiinpaluuheimo, meaning homecoming tribe, and we are coming up to 1,000 members soon. Yeah. Our goal is to revive indigenous Finnish culture and build the foundations for a natural parallel society. And now remember, each of our countries, each of our lands have the memory of our indigenous culture. Indigenous are not just people living in Africa, Australia, and South America. Each of our lands have indigenous origin.
And for those of us that have ancestral roots from areas of the earth that have had imperialism and statism dominating the land for so long, that there are scarcely any threads left in the written form to find any information on our indigenous ancestors, I would invite you to do the same thing that your ancient ancestors would have done to gather wisdom, which is learn from nature, apply biomimicry, go and sit with the land, connect with the trees, the waters, the mountains, sit and receive the intelligence from the earth, and begin to build your own traditions that are based on regenerative ethno-ecological lenses of perception and connecting with the land where you live, giving back to the land. Another factor I think is extremely important to consider for those of us looking to connect with ancestral wisdom and ways of seeing, especially those who feel that their ancestral indigenous past has been completely erased from written history, is that Each and every one of our ancestors wasn't just connecting spiritually with the living earth, they were also connecting biologically with the living earth. They were connecting with the trees, the fungi, the soil, the living waters, and all the information that they received from those beings through exosomic data, through microRNA that are being exuded by all the beings on Earth and received by their genetics, is also available to us now. So when you go out in the forest and you breathe that fresh forest air, when you touch the living soil, when you eat a fungi, you're receiving an upload to your memory, to your ancestral memory, the same kind of information that your ancestors could have received. Now, for more on this, I highly suggest checking out William Padilla Brown's information on truffles and how he sees it as a keystone species, and Paul Stamets' information on psilocybin mushrooms. And when you think about that biological connection in the context of an old-growth forest, and how the trees there can live many hundreds to thousands of years, and they're connected underground through the mycorrhizal networks to countless other beings, what you're really talking about is a living library of knowledge. And those are the kind of living libraries that our ancestors would have tapped into biologically, energetically, and through biomimicry using their minds. So it serves to show how important it is to protect the last few old-growth forests, and how through going there and connecting as our ancestors would, we can tap into that same living library and begin to build or rebuild our traditions. So I'm here in the place that's probably pretty similar ecologically to the story of where you're at from what I've read, where like 99% of it was clear cut, maybe 150, 200 years ago. And so there's only little patches of intact ecosystem left here. And so I'm really trying to preserve what's left here in Ontario, and also coming from out west. The background that's behind me here is old growth forest on Vancouver Island. And that is, you know, dwindling in numbers, but there are these reservoirs of not only medicine and, you know, climate mitigating benefits that they're offering us with holding the soil together and creating a cooler atmosphere there and doing all those things. But they're also like a spiritual reservoir of knowledge and how people can connect to the earth. They're so important as a living library to be like this template of the earth's vision for health, that I try to reach people on both those levels. So I talk to people who are more into the spiritual side of things about how important preserving these memories of health of Mother Earth and Creator is. And then I also talk about how, in a scientific sense, a utilitarian, I can't say the word utilitarian sense, it's important to preserve these ancient forest habitats, because these trees have carried the genetic memory of facing so much adverse events, you know, climate shifts, and their seeds are the resilient ones that can go forward into the future and be able to deal with all the stuff that's ahead of us. So we have to help them to be these refugia, these reservoirs of ancient memory. And so I'm trying to raise awareness about that. When there's corporations or governments doing exploitative things like they're doing on Vancouver Island or up north here in Ontario, there's a lot of lithium mining and cobalt mining exploration going on right now. And people talk about, they use the sustainability term, the greenwashing term, but they don't look at that. What they're really talking about is a sacrifice zone, as Derek Jensen would call it. So they're gonna, this place that's off the beaten trail, that's, you know, out of sight, out of mind, they don't mind that that thing gets totally decimated as long as they get their Tesla vehicle. So I'm trying to make the connection there for people that believe in permaculture ethics, let's say, earth care, but are just pushing forward with an alternative to oil without thinking about the implications for some of the habitats they have to mine the resources from. So another part of my work is activism, and then getting people not just to look at the doom and gloom, but to be like an embodiment of caring for the forest locally. So not just pointing at the bad guys, but actually getting people involved in appreciating the forest. Because here, especially in Ontario, what I found is that the term generational amnesia, or the shifting baseline syndrome, is so prevalent, where there's lots of kids here that they're born into this area that's like mostly monocultures. Maybe their parents didn't happen to have that much interest in the forest, so they've never even really been to the forests that are left here, the last few intact old growth. And I, coming from out west, where there's still quite a bit of intact old growth forest and wilderness, I sought those places out almost immediately, and I was like, oh, beautiful, this unique habitat I've never seen before. But for them, they haven't really even had a chance to integrate their perception of beauty in that place. So they're finding beauty on these digital avenues and these material things. So another part of my work is trying to get the people that are in that state of generational amnesia to remember what their ancestors did, the importance of these last few ecosystems, and to get them out there and show them, the beauty of these old trees, and get them to taste a pawpaw and think about growing their own. And that kind of snaps them out of the spell of this modern coveting of digital material stuff and gets them back into the rhythm of Earth.
Yeah, wow. You said so many things, and I love the way that you framed the old growth forests and that sort of the poetry of that. Like, it was really beautiful.
Thanks.
Trees are not just silent giants. They are the breath of the earth itself. Every inhale we take is a gift from their leaves. Every exhale we release feeds them in return. Science tells us they are oxygen factories, carbon cleaners, and climate regulators. But the magic goes deeper. Through their vast root networks, trees communicate, share nutrients, and warn each other of danger. A living web called the Wood Wide Web. Some trees are healers. The moringa of Africa, known as the tree of life, is so nutrient-dense, it can fight malnutrition and purify water. The willow tree gave us aspirin. The neem tree is called the village pharmacy for its hundreds of medicinal uses. But beyond medicine, trees are temples. They transmute sunlight into life force, anchoring heaven to earth through branches and roots. Stand beneath one. Place your hand on its trunk. You will feel it, the pulse of ancient wisdom, the slow heartbeat of Gaia herself. Without trees, there is no us. With trees, there is balance, breath, and remembrance of our place in the great circle of life.
Thus, the antidote for multi-generational amnesia, plant blindness, spiritual blindness, and anthropocentrism and apathy can be synthesized through creating cultural refugium, ancient cultural seeds germinated into living practices, traditions, and place-based wisdom that heal our relationship with the earth, nested within physical refugium, regenerative forest gardens where endangered ethno-ecologically pertinent species are given a priority in the design. And they can provide heirloom cultural seeds. These heirloom cultural seeds of knowledge will be enriched by the stimulus of modern knowledge and capable of setting down root through educational programs that invite children to get involved, show them why those practices are important, and show them why they'll enhance their lives. Many of us with European ancestral heritage and/or heritage linked to the places on Earth that are considered to be the cradles of civilization tend to think of the term indigenous as describing people of a specific culture and genetic background that are different from us based on where we currently live. In truth, indigeneity is a facet of each and every one of our ancestral bloodlines, regardless of skin color, genetic heritage, or nationality. In an essay called Reclaiming Our Indigenous European Roots in the Moon magazine by Lila June, Lila, having both European and Diné heritage, offers a unique perspective on this. She goes on to say, they estimate that 8 to 9 million European women were burned alive, drowned alive, dismembered, beaten, raped, or otherwise tortured as so-called witches. It is obvious to me now that these women were not witches. They were the medicine people of old Europe. They were the women who understood the herbal medicines, the ones who prayed with stones, the ones who passed on sacred chants, the ones who whispered to me at night. This all-out warfare on indigenous European women not only harmed them, but had a profound effect on the men who loved them, their husbands, sons, brothers. Nothing makes a man go mad like watching the woman in his family get burned alive. If the men respond to this hatred with hatred, the hatred is passed on, and who can blame them? While peace and love are the correct response to hatred, it is not easy response by any means. The indigenous cultures of Europe also sustained forced assimilation by the Roman Empire and other hegemonic forces. In fact, it was only a few decades ago that any Welsh child caught speaking Welsh in a school would have a block of wood tied to their neck. The words WN were inscribed, standing for Welsh not. This kind of public humiliation will sound very familiar to any Native Americans reading this who attended the U.S. government boarding schools or Canadian residential schools. The parallels between the genocide of indigenous Europeans and Native Americans are astounding. It boggles my mind that there are more people who don't see that we are the same people, who have undergone the same spiritual assault. The only difference between the red story and the white story is that we are in different stages of the process of spiritual warfare. Native Americans are only recently becoming something they are not. They are only recently starting to succumb to the temptations of drugs, alcohol, gambling, self-destruction, and the destruction of others. Just as some Native American people have been contorted and twisted by so many centuries of abuse, so too were the survivors of the European genocide. Both are completely forgivable in my eyes. Our task is to shake the amnesia, not to be ashamed of our Europeanness, but to reclaim our beautiful grandmothers, to reclaim our venerable grandfathers, to reclaim our lost languages, our lost ceremonies, our lost homelands, and become one with the great sacred motherland of Europe once again. European diaspora is spread all throughout the world, searching the planet for something that lives inside. I promise you, you will hear it when you climb the mountains of Switzerland, or Scotland, or Tuscany, or Hungary, or Portugal, of the sacred motherland of Europe. Just because bad things happened upon her bosom doesn't mean that she is bad. Martin Purcell continues to speak to the ubiquity of ancestral indigenous wisdom, regardless of our current nationality, in his book, The Unlikely Peace at Kutamakik, when he says, "Everything in nature ran according to its own nature. The running of the grass was in its growing, the running of the rivers their flowing. Granite bubbled up, cooled, compressed and crumbled. Birds lived, flew, sang and died. Everything did what it needed to, each simultaneously running its own race, each living according to its own nature together, never leaving any other part of the universe behind. The world's holy things raced constantly together, not to win anything over the next, but to keep the entire surging diverse motion of the living world from grinding to a halt, which is why there is no end to that race, no finish line. That would be oblivion to all. For the indigenous souls of all people who can still remember how to be real cultures, life is a race to be elegantly run, not a race to be competitively won. It cannot be won. It is the gift of the world's diverse motion that must be maintained, because human life has been given the gift of elegant motion. Whether we limp, roll, crawl, stroll, or fly, it is an obligation to engender that elegance of motion in our daily lives, in service of maintaining life, by moving and living as beautifully as we can. All else, to me, has the familiar taste of that domineering, warlike harshness that daily tries to cover its tracks in order to camouflage the deep ruts of some old, sick, grinding, ungainly need to flee away from the elegance of our original indigenous human souls. Our attempt to avariciously conquer or win a place where there are no problems, whether it be heaven or a new democracy, never mind if it is a spiritually ugly and immorally won and taken from someone else who is already there, has made a citifying world of people who, unconscious of it, have become our own ogreish problem to ourselves, our future, and the world. This is a problem that we cannot continue to attempt to competitively outrun by more and more effectively designed technological approaches to speed away from the past. For the specter of our own earth-wasting reality runs grinning competitively right alongside of us. By developing even more effective and entertaining methods of escape that only burn up the earth, the air, the animals, the plants, and the deeper substance of what it should mean to be human, by competing to get ahead, we have created a breakless competition that has outrun our innate beauty and marked out a very definite and imminent finish line. Living in and on a sphere, we cannot really outrun ourselves anyway. Therefore, I say, the entire devastating and hideous state of the world and its constant wounding and wrecking of the wild, beautiful, natural, viable, and small, only to keep alive an untenable cultural proceedance, is truly a spiritual sickness, one that will not be cured by the efficient use of the same thinking that maintains the sickness. Nor can this overly expensive, highly funded illness be symptomatically kept at bay any longer by more political, environmental, or social programs. We must, as individuals and communities, take the time necessary to learn how we might indigenously remember what a sane, original existence for a viable people might look like. To begin remembering our indigenous belonging on the earth, back to life, we must metabolize as individuals the grief of recognition of our lost directions, digest it into a valuable spiritual compost that allows us to learn to stay put without outrunning our strange past, and to get small, unarmed, brave, and beautiful. By trying to feed the holy in the nature with the fruit of the beauty from the tree of memory of our indigenous souls, grown in the composted failures of our past need to conquer, watered by the tears of our cultural grief, we might become ancestors worth descending from, and possibly grow a place of hope for a time beyond our own. The oversimplified and often totally inaccurate stories we are told about hunter-gatherer cultures portray this linear, almost classist dichotomy between pre-agricultural cultures and post-agricultural city cultures. We get the story portrayed to us that the story of progress or advancement of humans goes from us being drooling cavemen hunting herds of animals to grain-growing farmers practically overnight. But the reality is a lot more nuanced. In reality, for thousands of years prior to the existence of sedentary monoculture farming communities and involuntary government structures such as feudal dictatorships, monarchies, and nation-states, there were learned groups of human beings that had spent countless generations gathering place-based botanical, geological, mycological, hydrological, and spiritual wisdom, and they learned to apply that wisdom in the form of practical knowledge to access medicine, food, warmth, shelter, to navigate and find deeper meaning and spiritual purpose. These groups of humans living close to the land, developing ecological literacy with advanced botanical and mycological knowledge, were ubiquitous all over the earth for thousands of years. And those people, regardless of who you are and where you live, are your indigenous ancestors. Otzi the Iceman, a 5,300-year-old mummy found in 1991, was carrying birch polypore fungus, and the herbal medicines of chamomile and yarrow have been found in 50,000-year-old teeth. Our most distant ancestors, that have often been portrayed as thuggish idiot cavemen, appear to have possessed more mycological and botanical knowledge than most people living in cities today. And for those of us that have ancestral roots from areas of the earth that have had imperialism and statism dominating the land for so long that there are scarcely any threads left in the written form to find any information on our indigenous ancestors, I would invite you to do the same thing that your ancient ancestors would have done to gather wisdom, which is learn from nature, apply biomimicry, go and sit with the land, connect with the trees, the waters, the mountains, sit and receive the intelligence from the earth, and begin to build your own traditions that are based on regenerative ethno-ecological lenses of perception and connecting with the land where you live, giving back to the land. Another factor I think is extremely important to consider for those of us looking to connect with ancestral wisdom and ways of seeing, especially those who feel that their ancestral indigenous past has been completely erased from written history, is that each and every one of our ancestors wasn't just connecting spiritually with the living earth, they were also connecting biologically with the living earth. They were connecting with the trees, the fungi, the soil, the living waters, and all the information that they received from those beings through exosomic data, through microRNA that are being exuded by all the beings on Earth and received by their genetics, is also available to us now. So when you go out in the forest and you breathe that fresh forest air, when you touch the living soil, when you eat a fungi, you're receiving an upload to your memory, to your ancestral memory, the same kind of information that your ancestors could have received. And when you think about that biological connection in the context of an old-growth forest and how the trees there can live many hundreds to thousands of years and they're connected underground through the mycorrhizal networks to countless other beings, what you're really talking about is a living library of knowledge. And those are the kind of living libraries that our ancestors would have tapped into biologically, energetically, and through biomimicry using their minds. So it serves to show how important it is to protect the last few old-growth forests and how through going there and connecting as our ancestors would, we can tap into that same living library and begin to build or rebuild our traditions.